concluded spectrum auction made the government richer by close to 1,10,000 crore rupees. But what does it mean for the sector? What does it mean for consumers like you and me? To discuss all that and more, we have with us TRAI Chairman Dr. Rahul Khullar, speaking exclusively to ET Now. Sir, thank you so much for taking out the time. My first question to you is that, sir, the auction proceeds are close to 1,10,000 crore rupees. The government is jubilant. It's almost celebrating. You as the TRAI chairman, do you share the mood of the government, or do these results at some level worry you?
Well, look, from the government's perspective, it has realized its revenue goals. From an industry perspective, I think there are 2 or 3 things that we should be concerned about. One is, the most important, I think, is where are the resources going to come for the next round of investment? Resources can only come from 3 places: equity, debt, internal accruals. Equity, people are not willing to pay for right now for reasons which you understand. Even foreign investors who've put a whole bunch of money in and not got returns, so why should they put more money into the bank? Debt levels are already high and
expected to go up.
Expected to rise. So indebtedness will increase, and with the increase in indebtedness, internal accruals will fall. So the question to ask ourselves is that, as an industry, where is the money going to come for future investments in network, in quality of service, in data delivery, in all these things? And those things are matters for concern. My own assessment is that margins will be on future this year, and also in 16-17, the margins will, the amortization and the capital cost repayments will peak sometime in 2020, 2021. But before that, I think the industry will have to start doing some readjustment in terms of tariffs and top-line adjustments, because without that, if the margins don't exist, they will simply not be viable. So I think that's one concern we should be worried about. We've done the calculations, and the cost impact comes to about anywhere between 6 to 7 paisa.
7 paisa, yeah. I was hoping to come to this, yes.
Correct.
Right.
So even if that is passed through, it's not a big deal. It's no big killing burden to this thing. Yes, it's not trivial,
right?
But equally, it is not substantial.
Such high, but still much higher than what the government's calculation is. It's about, at best, 1.5 paisa that the government's calculation.
Yeah, I think the government's calculation does not take into account capital costs, which are huge.
Right.
The numbers I am giving you are at 15% interest rate.
Right.
So if corporates have to pay anything higher than 15, then the cost impact
will
starts
be even
rising,
more significant.
Be more.
Right. So at some level, sir, you think that this is not as consumer friendly, or at the end of the day, consumers are definitely paying for higher spectrum cost?
Well, it's a critical input, and how can consumers not pay for it? So, I mean, in a sense, that's no-brainer.
So coming back to the auction results per se, do you think that the results would have been, or the outcome would have been fundamentally different had the government accepted the TRAI's recommendation of putting more spectrum on the table?
If you see the numbers, 70% of the revenue came from renewal spectrum, and that was only because it was a battle to the death, fight to the death.
Right.
So that explains what happened in 900. And 900, you had no room for maneuver, because
you had to win back.
Your spectrum.
Right.
And now in 1800, you had 1800 and 2100 are the 2 bands where we said you could release more.
Right.
In 1800, you could have released more if you had a dialogue with defense and others, and there were areas where you could have managed to get more out. Given the appetite for 1800, you'd have probably got more money out of that.
Right.
But also, the people are playing it safe. If spectrum is going to come up again.
They don't want to increase the prices so much that...
Why not just wait? Wait till this thing. Also, some corporates are sort of using the strategy that, look, I will use 900 for delivering 3G rather than buy 2100 at an outrageous price. So I think there was a mixed sort of reaction on 2100. My sense is that if you had put all of the spectrum out, may have seen a more enthusiastic response. Because currently, if you look at what has happened in 2100, two corporates, just two, have cornered 90% of that 2100 spectrum.
Right.
Which means they are free to go ahead with their 3G business.
Pan-India 3G they'll have.
Without the complications of intra-circle roaming.
Right. Yes.
So that's, from their strategic point of view, that's a huge gain.
So one question on 2100 megahertz. Another round of auction is expected. Does it now mean that the regulator would have to go back to the drawing board and probably reconsider the prices, given that there is a market price, at least in most of the circles?
Yeah, I mean, you cannot ignore information that is discovered from the market process while determining reserve prices. So I think, yes, at some point of time, if the government announces an auction, we may have to take a view on the matter.
Sir, do you think right now there is an appetite, does the industry have the appetite for another round of auctions in 2300, 2500, given the kind of prices that have been paid?
I don't think, I think that they will, at this juncture, they will look for two things. They need at least 6 months to just settle down, okay? Start paying the money, look at what is happening to their margins, see what pass-throughs can be strategically affected, what can't be affected, and then take stock. First, remember, even banks will be very reluctant. Right. And until other, financing sources are found, you are not going to be able to stump up the cash.
Right.
So how are you going to buy anything if you have empty pockets?
Right.
So it's essentially, if you were to try and run an auction, and only people with deep pockets
will be able to come back on the table. Right.
Otherwise, essentially, it will be, in my view, an unfair auction, because others who have sort of gone through one round of beating, even before they're out to recover and fairly come back to the table for bidding, you would effectively preclude them.
How would now the pricing really happen? Of course, 2500 is a blue ocean, but the government's whole argument that companies are willing to pay top dollar for spectrum and therefore prices should be as high as possible, does that now argument stand vindicated?
I think it's erroneous to believe that all spectrum at all times commands huge dollar prices. That's a plain absurd. Meaning, look at your coal auctions. Did all coal mines get the same price? Daft. That proposition is completely foolish. In 2300 and 2500, look at 2300. It was sold in 2010.
Right. Rollouts haven't yet happened.
Right. Now, do we seriously believe that people are pounding out down the doors to buy 2300 megahertz spectrum? And if they are not, then isn't it a little foolhardy to believe that you will get top dollar and thousands of crores of revenue from that spectrum? Right. Now, 2500 is a different kettle of fish, because the moment you open the 2500 window and sufficient spectrum is available, then people are going to say, okay, well, now that looks like a whole different ballgame, because for the 2500, an ecosystem exists.
Can revenue maximization, or should revenue maximization really be the objective as far as the government's position is concerned for auctioning spectrum sales or doing spectrum sales?
It is very difficult, meaning my personal view, and that's not necessarily the view of the authority, is that revenue maximization should not be the goal. In no country has it been the goal, and India should not stand out as an exception to that, quite simply because the gains, the positive externalities and what are called spillover effects are so large from the telecom sector that it's killing the golden goose. So don't do it. Second, please understand, in most other markets are saturated.
Right.
I mean, with the exception of Africa and India.
Yes.
And that as a means for delivering all these things which are so-called goods, public goods, e-governance and digital dividend and all that sort of stuff.
Yes.
Then you have to, I think, start looking at spectrum pricing somewhat differently.
You've talked about how Digital India will be a pipe dream if these core issues or the broadband issues are not addressed. Given the current policy making or the stance of the government, do you think Digital India is going to be far from a reality as far as the government's goal are concerned?
Actual implementation of the National Optical Fiber Network has been abysmally poor. If you achieve 1% of the total target in 2.5 years, you please make your own judgment. But the other is the availability of access spectrum, backhaul spectrum, spectrum-related policies.
Right.
And then applications, what will ride on the network, actual delivery, what role the private sector will play in doing both the applications as well as the rollout.
Right.
Now, that's where I said, that's why I mentioned earlier, if you're going to keep squeezing the private sector for all it's got,
then it cannot
then
play
where
any
is it going
role
to be your partner in
this massive ambitious project?
So, make up your mind. Either you're going to get the revenue or you're going to have a public-private partnership.
So moving on to two pieces of policy making that the industry has been waiting for fairly long, that is spectrum trading and sharing. Do you think they're now meaningless now that the auctions have happened, companies have paid top dollar to fill in the spectrum gaps that existed in their holding?
No, on the contrary, they are even more important today, I think.
Okay.
Two separate reasons. Number one is trading. See, look, merger and acquisition guidelines are taking forever to get finalized.
Right.
And this internal tug of war within the government is going to carry on. God knows when those will be finalized. Many times, companies don't want to buy other companies lock, stock and barrel. They just want to asset strip.
Right.
And the most valuable asset is spectrum.
Right, absolutely.
So what trading will enable is allow this assets to be stripped, and that will help in consolidation.
Right.
So if company X is wanting to sell out and company Y wants to buy, what they will do is, Mr. Company X, you keep your radio access network and the rest of it. Your spectrum I'll buy. And what happens as a result? Company X exits and company Y gets the spectrum.
Right.
So two things happen. Consolidation takes place
Yes.
and greater availability of spectrum on a per telco basis.
True.
So this is the first thing.
Right.
Second is sharing. Sharing is important because the important thing to ask yourself as a citizen is this. If there is just this much amount of spectrum that is available for commercial deployment, is it not a sensible idea to pool and share that spectrum rather than give everybody driblets of that spectrum?
True.
And as long as coverage and capacity of spectrum is a nonlinear function of the quantum of spectrum, then it means that if you have 5 and I have 5 and we pool our 5s and get 10, our coverage can quadruple.
True.
Now, I'm saying leave aside whether you get more spectrum back from defense or you take something back from Doordarshan or you do this or you do that.
True.
Those things can carry on.
Yes.
It may take time to get those things done. But at least with what is available, can we be, as economists say, in a Pareto superior situation? And we can.
Yeah.
And therefore, again, the spectrum sharing, according to me, is an absolute no-brainer. It should have been done a long, long time ago. Absolutely no question about it.
The government held it back to get the maximum revenues out of the auction.
That's your conjecture. One other thing before I sort of close this thing, please understand, spectrum sharing is also a very good way to handle fragmentation. I've got spectrum here, you've got spectrum next to me, we are not able to pool. And I've got spectrum in different parts of the band. By pooling, you get over the fragmentation hurdle.
Right. sir, one question on M&A policy. You talked about it has been hanging for such a long time. But do you think that it will actually have any meaningful impact? Do you think consolidation will take place through M&A policy? Or do you think we are actually sitting at a situation where we can see some maybe smaller telecom companies actually going bust because costs are very high, they are debt laden? Is that a possibility?
Yes, but the way they will go bust is that they will bleed themselves to death. It's not, understand in most other industries, if I'm bleeding and I'm not covering my variable costs, I just shut down and walk away.
Right.
But where I have an asset like spectrum, and I paid for it, and returning it to government gives me zero,
right,
I will continue in business.
Right.
In the hope that at some point of time I'll be able to sell the spectrum and recover some of the costs.
Monetize it, yes.
And therefore, what you've seen happening in the industry is a sort of slow bleeding to death of many of these companies. Government needs to trade off the price which it will charge for a transfer of spectrum. Now, if you're going to say to Gaurie that when you're taking over Rahul's business, you pay 100% of value, market value, where is the incentive for you to take me over? Okay? Yes. Now, my sense is the trade-off here is this. If you could, and I publicly said this, if you could reduce that to say even 80%, right? You may lose 20% of the capital gain, but you will still be able to tax the existing capital gain, and that's an additional flow that comes to you. So you don't get 80 alone, you get a little more than 80. Right. Second, you enable consolidation. Now, the consolidation helps people transition from going out of business and this thing. So you stop the bleeding. Now, when you stop the bleeding, the spillover effects are on your banking sector.
Absolutely, yes.
So what is a non-performing asset, or will become a huge non-performing asset if you let consolidation take place sometime in the future? Right. That gets advanced. Things get sorted out, banks' books get cleared up, and you move on. Right. But if you don't do this, the purpose of a merger and acquisition will be lost. And I think industry has been saying that for quite some time, What is the point of having a merger if I'm going to pay 100 and I'm saddled with buying the company lock, stock, barrel, which means I have to take over its debt, I have to take over its assets. And many of those radio access networks are now out of date.
Absolutely.
If everybody is jumping on the 4G wagon, you will have to start from scratch. So that's I think is the nature of the problem.
If we were to talk about the regulator that exists in the banking sector vis-a-vis, let's say, the regulator that exists in the telecom space, do you think it's time that maybe TRAI should get more teeth to become like an RBI, simply because look at the kind of two divergent views that the government and TRAI stand on. None of the major recommendations of the TRAI were accepted by the government. Do you think it's time that TRAI should get more teeth, act like an RBI in telecom?
Let me separate this into two parts. One is, do we need to re-engineer the law to deal with the current situation and the TRAI Act? Answer simple, yes. This act was passed 20 years ago, close to 20 years ago. The world has changed. You cannot be frozen in time.
Right.
You have to change the law. Should the regulators' powers be changed in the changed circumstances? Answer, yes. You may need to refocus the attention of both government and the regulator on other areas which have become more important today. Right. Separate issue. Second issue, what is it about regulation that is important, and do you need to be an RBI or something like that? I believe where prices were recommended and those didn't suit the government, they changed them, and that's a sovereign power, they're welcome to do it. The more difficult question is that there are a host of other recommendations which have been piling up, both in broadcasting and telecom, and no action is being taken. Now, in sectors like these, where technology is changing rapidly, a recommendation becomes out of date in 1 year.
Right, yes. My last question to you is on net neutrality. This is an issue that's a huge debate globally. Of course, there is a consultation paper that TRAI has floated. But, sir, do you think in India we can have net neutrality right now? Is the Indian market really prepared for net neutrality?
Let me put it this way. I think first, the consultation process is on. I am not in a position to give a view to you one way or the other.
True.
Second, both sides have very strong arguments in their favor.
Okay.
The persons arguing the net neutrality case have very strong arguments.
Telecom
so do
companies.
the telco companies. So do the telcos. The other part of your question is actually loaded in favor of telcos, which is, can we afford net neutrality? Now that is typically a sort of question which the telco will raise.
Right.
And yes, that is true. That is a problem. That who is going to make the investment in the infrastructure and this thing. But that's only one part of the argument. The counter argument on the other side is, look, are you going to stifle innovation? Are you going to stifle creativity? And since the net has essentially been open,
right,
why do you want to try and shut it down? And will you ever be able to shut it down?
Right.
Or regulate it, or license it, or do whatever you want? At the present point of time, there are no rules
right.
of engagement until the government forms a policy or comes out with legislation, and you know how much time is going to take that.
Right.
What do we do in the transition?
Yeah. Especially in such a dynamic situation like this.
So, if the regulator and the government do not take any action, then it's the Wild West.
Absolutely.
So, what we need to at least engage in as a debate is, all right, you have your point of view, he has his point of view. Is there some middle ground where transparency and rules can be put in place that proscribe certain practice? Proscribe, that is, you just simply cannot do this as telcos.
Right, yes.
And equal, I mean, where it's clearly egregious behavior in terms of violation of net neutrality. And equally, are you guys willing to at least compromise that this much is doable in our circumstances? I think that balance has got to get struck. If you do not do that, and if you do not put rules in place, it's the Wild West. It's a very, very, very dicey country.
Right. So my last question before we wrap this up, your stint as chairman of TRAI is close to coming to an end. Is there anything that you think you would have ideally done differently in hindsight?
No, I think, look, one is that one must never be a judge in one's own cause.
True.
You guys and the media, others, posterity will judge what we did or what we did not do over the last 3 years. I don't think it's fair for us to answer that task. I think one of the biggest tasks we had and set for ourselves was to restore some degree of public trust and credibility in the institution. And I think we've come some way in doing that. And I would only hope that that process continues, because any public institution survives only on the trust and its credibility.
Right.
And that, I think, we've done what we could. Perhaps we could have done more. You guys will judge that.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much for taking out the time. That was Dr. Rahul Khullar making a pitch for a complete change in TRAI's role given the current dynamics of Indian telecom, and also pointing out that it will be Indian consumer that will have to pay out for the higher spectrum cost.
Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/ETNow, and don't forget to click the like button. You can also follow us on Twitter at ETNowLive. To stay updated with all our programming, hit the subscribe button on our YouTube channel by logging on to youtube.com/user/ETNow.